Some nights, the person who saves your life is the one who has forgotten how to save a heart. At 3:07 a.m., the city looked as though it had finally given up trying to stay awake. Rain shimmered beneath yellow streetlights, empty intersections stretched for blocks, and the silence between passing cars felt heavier than the storm itself. Emily Carter stood outside a 24-hour convenience store, with a phone that barely held a 2% charge. Her denim jacket was soaked through, her sneakers splashed with muddy water, and her eyes were so swollen from crying that the world beyond the parking lot blurred into soft streaks of red and gold. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket, took one slow breath, and opened the rideshare app with trembling fingers. Home was no longer an option. The apartment she had rented for 3 years was locked behind a door she could no longer enter. Her last paycheck had disappeared into overdue bills before she even held it in her hands. Earlier that evening, the diner manager had quietly apologized before handing her a final envelope and explaining that business had slowed too much to keep everyone employed. Emily had smiled because she didn't want to make him feel guilty. She thanked him because kindness had always been easier than anger. Then she walked outside, realized she had nowhere to go, and finally allowed herself to cry. The app searched for a driver longer than expected. 1 minute became 2. The spinning circle continued while rain tapped softly against her cracked phone screen. Just before the battery warning flashed again, a ride appeared. Driver L. Blackwood. Arrival. 1 minute. Vehicle black sedan. Emily whispered, "Please don't cancel." Across the city, Lucian Blackwood watched an unfamiliar notification appear on a phone that should never have received civilian ride requests. He frowned without touching the screen. His driver account had never existed. His phone wasn't connected to any transportation service. Yet the address glowed with quiet certainty, almost like an invitation written by invisible hands. For more than 6 centuries, Lucian had trusted very little. Kings, councils, treaties, promises, they all changed with time. Ancient instincts never did. And every instinct told him this request was impossible. Still, something older than logic urged him forward. Within moments, a sleek black sedan rolled silently toward the convenience store. The engine barely made a sound as it stopped beside the curb. Emily opened the rear door carefully, afraid the driver might see the tears she couldn't hide anymore. "Emily?" the man asked gently. His voice was calm, smooth, and strangely comforting. She nodded without looking directly at him. "Yeah, that's me. I'm sorry if I made you wait." Lucian glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Human sorrow carried a scent unlike anything else. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was quieter, heavier, almost impossible to describe. He had faced wars that lasted decades. He had watched kingdoms disappear beneath snow and stone. Yet the silent heartbreak sitting behind him felt unfamiliar. Emily buckled her seatbelt and stared out the rain-covered window. After several long seconds, she whispered, "Could we just drive for a little while before we get anywhere?" Lucian's hands rested motionless on the steering wheel. For the first time in centuries, the Vampire King realized he had absolutely no idea what to say to a sad human. The windshield wipers moved in a slow, steady rhythm, pushing away sheets of rain that immediately returned as though the night refused to let the city be seen clearly. Emily rested her forehead against the cool window and watched familiar streets fade behind them. She had stopped crying, but the silence she carried felt even louder. Lucian kept both hands on the steering wheel, his silver eyes fixed on the empty road ahead. Normally he preferred silence. For centuries it had been his closest companion. Tonight it felt strangely uncomfortable. He searched for words the way a soldier searched unfamiliar ground. Every sentence seemed wrong before it was spoken. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" Emily smiled without happiness. "That depends on how you define safe." Lucian glanced into the mirror. "What does that mean?" She hesitated before answering. "It means I have places where I can sleep, but nowhere that feels like home anymore." The answer settled inside the car like another passenger. Lucian had heard countless confessions through the centuries. Kings had admitted betrayal. Warriors had admitted fear. None of them sounded as quietly defeated as the young woman sitting behind him. She folded her hands together, trying to warm them. Her fingers were pale from the cold. Without saying a word, Lucian adjusted the temperature controls. Warm air slowly filled the cabin. Emily looked up with quiet surprise. Thank you. He simply nodded. Kindness from strangers usually came with expectations. Hers did not. That puzzled him more than any mystery he had faced in decades. They stopped at a red light. A small bakery on the corner still had its lights on despite the late hour. Emily stared at it for several seconds before speaking again. My mom used to buy cinnamon rolls from places like that whenever life got hard. Lucian waited. She continued with a faint laugh. She said sweet things could not fix broken hearts, but they reminded us the world still had good people in it. The light turned green, but Lucian remained still for one heartbeat longer than necessary. Then he quietly pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, instead of continuing down the avenue. Emily looked confused. Did I enter the wrong address? No, he answered calmly. Wait here. Before she could respond, he stepped into the rain and disappeared inside the bakery. Emily watched through the fogged glass as the tall stranger spoke politely with the elderly baker. A few minutes later he returned carrying a small paper bag and 2 hot cups. Steam curled into the cool air as he settled back into the driver's seat. He handed her the bag without ceremony. They had fresh cinnamon rolls. Emily blinked several times before accepting it. You really did not have to do this. Perhaps not, Lucian replied. But you sounded as though you hoped someone would. She laughed for the first time that night. It was soft, almost uncertain but real. The sound caught him completely off guard. Something ancient inside him, something he believed had vanished. Centuries ago, shifted almost imperceptibly. Emily opened the paper bag and broke 1 cinnamon roll in half. You bought 2, she said, offering him a piece. You should have one. Lucian stared at the pastry as though it were an impossible object. He could not remember the last time anyone had offered to share something with him simply because they wanted to. He accepted the small piece with careful fingers. Outside, the rain continued falling over the sleeping city. Neither of them noticed the dark sport utility vehicle parked across the street. Its headlights remained off, but someone inside quietly raised a camera and took a single photograph of the black sedan before disappearing back into the darkness. Emily looked down at the warm cinnamon roll resting in her hands as though it were something far more valuable than bread and sugar. She took a small bite, closed her eyes for a second and smiled. It was not a dramatic smile. It was the quiet kind that appeared only after someone had been exhausted for far too long. Lucian noticed it immediately. He had watched emperors celebrate victories, nobles perform rehearsed laughter, and politicians disguise ambition behind polished expressions. None of them resembled the simple relief he saw now. Somehow, that tiny smile carried more honesty than an entire royal court. Emily looked toward him again. You never answered my question. Lucian raised one eyebrow. Which one? Why are you still driving? She asked softly. Most people working this late look tired. You do not. You look like someone who has nowhere he actually wants to be. The words lingered inside the car. Lucian almost smiled. Almost. If she only knew how impossible her observation truly was. 600 years had taught him to hide every emotion behind perfect control. Yet somehow a stranger had noticed the loneliness beneath it after less than 20 minutes. Perhaps I enjoy quiet roads, he answered carefully. Emily shook her head. No. That is not it. She looked back through the rain-covered window. People who enjoy quiet usually look peaceful. You look lonely. Lucian's fingers tightened ever so slightly around the steering wheel. Lonely. The word echoed through memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Empty castles. Endless meetings. Celebrations where every smile was measured. Centuries surrounded by thousands of voices, while never hearing anyone speak to him without fear or obligation. He quietly started the car again. You notice people very well. Emily gave a small shrug. It was part of my job. Customers never really wanted coffee. They wanted someone to notice when they were having the worst day of their lives. Lucian glanced at her in the mirror once more. And who noticed yours? She laughed softly, but there was sadness behind it. Nobody. That is why I got good at noticing everyone else. The answer settled over both of them like the rain outside. For several blocks neither of them spoke. The city became quieter as they crossed an old bridge overlooking the river. Streetlights reflected across the dark water like scattered pieces of gold. Emily suddenly reached into her worn canvas bag. I almost forgot. She pulled out a folded blue scarf with delicate silver stitching along one edge. Would you mind holding this for a second? Lucian accepted it without hesitation. The instant the fabric touched his hand, something impossible happened. His pulse, which rarely changed, skipped once. The silver thread woven into the scarf formed an ancient pattern almost invisible to human eyes. A pattern no modern tailor could have created. He examined it carefully while pretending nothing was unusual. Emily smiled faintly. It belonged to my grandmother. She always said it would somehow bring me home whenever I got lost. Lucian traced one embroidered symbol with his thumb. It resembled an old crest that had disappeared from vampire history, nearly 300 years earlier.
Impossible.
That design should not exist anywhere outside the royal archives beneath his hidden citadel. Your grandmother? He asked quietly. Where did she get this? Emily looked surprised by the question. I honestly do not know. She never talked much about her younger years. She just said some memories were safer left sleeping. Lucian slowly returned the scarf. Before he could ask another question, his eyes shifted toward the rearview mirror. 2 headlights had appeared behind them. The same dark sport utility vehicle from the bakery had returned. It stayed exactly 6 car lengths back, matching every turn with perfect precision. Emily never noticed. She was still carefully folding her grandmother's scarf, but Lucian's expression became almost unreadable. He had spent centuries recognizing patterns, and one lesson had never failed him. Coincidences happen once. The third time they became intentions. The sport utility vehicle remained behind them as they left the bridge and entered a quieter part of the city where the office towers gave way to sleeping neighborhoods. Its headlights never flashed. It never tried to pass. It simply remained there, matching every turn with patient precision. Lucian did not need another glance to know it was still present. His senses had already measured the distance, the engine rhythm, and the faint metallic scent drifting through the rain. Emily, however, remained completely unaware. She wrapped her grandmother's blue scarf around her shoulders and leaned back against the seat with a tired sigh. I am sorry, she said quietly. Lucian looked at her through the mirror. For what? For making your shift so strange. She smiled with gentle embarrassment. You probably expected someone going home from a concert or the airport, not someone who asked you to drive around because she could not figure out her life. Lucian answered after a brief pause. I have experienced stranger nights. Emily laughed softly. Somehow I believe you. The silence returned, but this time it felt lighter. She looked outside as rows of small houses passed by. Warm porch lights glowed against the darkness. Families slept peacefully behind curtains while rain tapped gently against rooftops. Do you ever wonder, she asked, how many people are lying awake right now pretending everything is fine? Lucian did not answer immediately. The question reached deeper than she could possibly imagine. For centuries he had walked through endless nights while the rest of the world slept. He had become an expert at pretending. Yes, he finally replied. More than most people realize. Emily nodded as though his answer confirmed something she already believed. I used to think adults had everything figured out. Then I became one. Another quiet laugh escaped her. Turns out everybody is improvising. Lucian almost smiled again. There was an honesty about her that felt disarming. She did not speak to impress anyone. She simply spoke the truth as she understood it. Suddenly her stomach made a small, unmistakable sound. Emily covered her face with one hand. Please pretend you did not hear that. You have not eaten dinner, Lucian observed. I had coffee. Coffee is not dinner. It was discounted. He turned onto another street without explaining why. 2 minutes later the sedan stopped beside a small diner whose neon sign still glowed beneath the rain. Emily looked confused. What are we doing? Eating, Lucian answered simply. I cannot let you spend the rest of the night surviving on coffee. Emily shook her head immediately. I cannot afford it. Lucian reached into his coat and opened the passenger door. Then allow me to be stubborn. She hesitated before quietly following him inside. The elderly waitress greeted them with a warm smile and led them to a booth near the window. Emily studied the menu for several moments before ordering the least expensive breakfast available. Lucian noticed but said nothing. Instead, he ordered exactly the same meal. When the food arrived, Emily looked almost embarrassed by how grateful she felt. "Nobody has done something like this for me in a long time," she admitted. "It is only breakfast," Lucian replied. "Sometimes breakfast is everything," she answered. Across the street, hidden behind rain-covered windows, the dark sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past the diner before parking beneath a broken streetlight. Inside, one shadowed figure lowered a pair of binoculars. Another unfolded a weathered photograph. It showed the same silver pattern embroidered along the edge of Emily's blue scarf. Neither Emily nor Lucian noticed that, while they shared a simple meal beneath warm lights, someone else had just confirmed they had finally found the girl they had been searching for. The warmth of the diner lingered long after the plates had been cleared away. Outside, the rain continued to fall with quiet determination, turning the windows into soft mirrors that reflected the sleepy restaurant lights. Emily wrapped both hands around the last few sips of hot coffee, trying to make the feeling last. It had been weeks since she had eaten without worrying about how many dollars remained in her wallet. Lucian watched her carefully, saying very little. He had learned centuries ago that silence often revealed more than questions ever could. The elderly waitress approached with the check and smiled kindly. "You two make a nice pair," she said with a gentle laugh before placing the receipt on the table. Emily's cheeks turned slightly pink. "Oh, we just met tonight." The waitress nodded knowingly. Sometimes the people who arrive unexpectedly are the ones who change everything. She walked away before either of them could answer. Emily looked down at the table and smiled awkwardly. People really like making assumptions. Lucian folded the receipt without looking at the total. Occasionally they notice possibilities before the people involved do. Emily laughed softly. "That is a mysterious answer for such a simple comment." He offered the faintest smile, almost invisible. "I have been told that before." They stepped back into the cool night air. The rain had softened into a light mist that drifted across the empty street. Emily pulled her grandmother's blue scarf a little tighter around her shoulders. As she adjusted the fabric, one corner slipped loose, revealing the delicate silver embroidery beneath the streetlight. Lucian paused. The symbol seemed brighter than before, almost as though the moisture had awakened tiny strands hidden inside the thread. For a fraction of a second, the pattern appeared to form a complete crest before fading back into ordinary stitching. Emily noticed him staring. "It is beautiful, is not it?" she asked. "My grandmother repaired it herself every winter. She never let anyone else touch it." Lucian nodded slowly. "Did she ever explain the design?" Emily shook her head. "Only that it belonged to someone who believed. Kindness was stronger than fear." Those words settled heavily in Lucian's mind. They sounded less like family advice and more like an ancient promise. He opened the passenger door for her, and they continued driving through the nearly empty streets. Neither of them realized that, several blocks away, another vehicle quietly pulled away from the curb and resumed following at a careful distance. Inside the dark sport utility vehicle, one passenger lowered a small notebook onto his lap. Several sketches of the silver crest covered its pages. One drawing matched Emily's scarf perfectly. Another carried a handwritten note. "The heir's mark. Confirm identity before sunrise." Back inside the sedan, Emily stared through the windshield as dawn still seemed impossibly far away. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Do you believe people meet for a reason?" Lucian considered the question longer than she expected. During 600 years, he had dismissed fate as something invented by hopeful minds. Yet tonight had unfolded through one impossible coincidence after another. A ride request that should never have reached him. A lonely woman carrying a forgotten royal symbol. A scarf that belonged in records buried beneath his own kingdom. "I believe," he answered quietly, "that some roads exist long before we realize we are walking on them." Emily looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "That sounds like something my grandmother would have said." Before Lucian could respond, a soft chime echoed from the dashboard. His navigation screen flickered unexpectedly. Instead of displaying city streets, it showed a single unfamiliar destination highlighted in pale silver letters. Blackwood Estate. Distance remaining 12 miles. Lucian had never entered that address into any system. His expression remained calm, but deep inside, an ancient certainty began to awaken. Whatever force had brought Emily into his car had not finished guiding the night. Emily leaned forward and studied the glowing navigation screen. "Blackwood Estate," she read aloud. "Is that where you live?" Lucian's eyes remained on the road. For the first time that evening, he did not immediately answer. He knew every major road in the city, every hidden entrance beneath old buildings, every forgotten tunnel constructed centuries before automobiles existed. Yet he had never programmed this destination into the vehicle. More troubling still, the route continued updating itself as though some unseen force already knew where they belonged. "It appears the system has made a mistake," he said calmly. Emily tilted her head. "That is one very specific mistake." She reached toward the screen intending to cancel the route, but the display dimmed for an instant before returning brighter than before. The silver letters remained exactly the same. Blackwood Estate. 12 miles. Estimated arrival. 23 minutes. Emily slowly pulled her hand back. "That is strange." Lucian nodded once. "Yes." Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Outside, the city continued to thin until familiar neighborhoods gave way to older roads lined with towering oak trees. Fog drifted across the pavement in pale ribbons, softening the glow of distant streetlights. Emily wrapped her scarf around herself again and quietly watched the passing landscape. "You know," she said after a while, "my grandmother used to tell me that roads remember people." Lucian glanced toward her. What did she mean? "She said some places wait patiently until the right person is ready to return." Emily smiled at the memory. "I always thought she was making up fairy tales." Lucian considered her words carefully. Fairy tales. Human beings often gave simple names to truths they could not explain. He looked briefly into the rearview mirror. The dark sport utility vehicle still followed at a careful distance, never drawing closer, never falling farther behind. Its persistence confirmed what he had already suspected. Tonight was no accident. Inside the other vehicle, the passengers remained unusually quiet. The older of the two observers opened an aged leather folder containing faded sketches, handwritten family records, and one yellowed photograph. The photograph showed a young woman standing beside an elderly lady wearing the same blue scarf Emily carried tonight. Across the bottom, written in elegant ink, were 4 words. Guardian of the Silent Crest. The observer closed the folder without speaking. He simply watched the black sedan continue into the mist. Back inside the car, Emily suddenly looked embarrassed. "Can I admit something?" Lucian nodded. "When your car first pulled up tonight, I almost canceled the ride." "Why?" "Because you looked too calm." She laughed softly at herself. "Everyone else I met today seemed rushed, stressed, impatient. Then you arrived looking like nothing in the world could surprise you." Lucian allowed himself the faintest smile. "You have now proven that assumption incorrect." Emily noticed the smile immediately. "There it is." "What?" "Your smile." It finally showed up. Lucian looked forward again, almost amused by her observation. "It is not something I use often." "Maybe you should," she replied. "It makes you seem less lonely." The words lingered quietly between them. Before Lucian could answer, the navigation screen chimed again. A new message appeared beneath the destination. "Access granted. Royal route activated." Emily frowned. Royal route. Lucian felt an unfamiliar stillness settle deep inside him. No modern navigation system could generate those words. They belonged to an ancient security network created long before electricity reached the estate. It responded only to members of the royal bloodline and a handful of forgotten magical oaths. Yet somehow it had awakened tonight. As the sedan rounded the next bend, the fog ahead slowly parted, revealing the outline of enormous iron gates standing open in complete silence. Lucian had not commanded them to open. No guard had been notified. They were already waiting. Emily leaned forward as the sedan rolled through the open iron gates. They moved without a sound, as though invisible hands had welcomed them long before the headlights reached the entrance. Beyond them, a winding stone road stretched through towering oak trees whose branches formed a dark canopy overhead. Soft lanterns illuminated the path at perfect intervals, their warm glow reflecting across the rain-covered pavement. Emily looked from one side of the road to the other in quiet amazement. "This place is beautiful," she whispered. "I did not even know an estate like this existed outside the city." Lucian remained silent. He knew every inch of this road. He had traveled it more times than any human could imagine. Yet tonight it felt unfamiliar, almost as though the estate itself had awakened for someone other than its king. The navigation screen faded to black the moment they crossed the gates. No directions. No maps. Only silence. Emily smiled nervously. "I guess your mysterious navigation system thinks we made it." Lucian nodded once, though his thoughts remained elsewhere. Ahead, the outline of the mansion slowly emerged through the mist. Tall stone walls, graceful towers, and rows of glowing windows rose above the ancient gardens like something lifted from another century. Emily stared without speaking. "Please tell me you are not just an Uber driver," she said with an uneasy laugh. Lucian looked at her in the mirror. "Would that disappoint you?" She considered the question honestly. "No. I just think nobody who drives strangers around at 3 in the morning should also own a place that looks like a castle." Before Lucian could answer, several figures appeared beneath the front entrance. They wore dark formal coats and stood perfectly still despite the rain. Emily assumed they were security staff. Lucian immediately recognized every one of them. His chief steward, 2 royal advisors, 4 members of the night guard. None of them had been summoned. The sedan stopped beneath the covered entrance. For several seconds nobody moved. Then, as Lucian stepped from the driver's seat, every waiting figure lowered their heads at exactly the same moment. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," the steward said calmly. Emily froze before she had even opened her own door. She looked toward Lucian, then back toward the people waiting outside. Surely she had misunderstood. "Your Majesty." Those words did not belong in real life. Lucian closed his eyes for the briefest instant. He had hoped to postpone this moment. He turned toward the steward. "Why are you here?" The older man answered respectfully. "The estate awakened. Every royal seal opened on its own. We believed you were returning with someone." The house itself had recognized. Emily slowly stepped out of the car, still holding her grandmother's blue scarf. The rain had almost stopped, leaving only tiny drops drifting through the cool morning air. One of the advisors noticed the silver embroidery immediately. His eyes widened. He whispered something too quietly for Emily to hear. Another guard instinctively placed one hand over his heart. None of them were looking at Lucian anymore. Every pair of eyes had shifted toward the young woman standing beside the sedan. Emily looked completely confused. "I think everyone is staring at me." Lucian followed their gaze. The silver thread along her scarf had begun to shimmer softly beneath the lantern light, revealing the complete ancient crest for the first time. It glowed with a quiet radiance that no ordinary fabric could produce. Emily looked down in surprise. It has never done that before. The steward took one careful step forward, his voice almost reverent. "That symbol has not appeared in this kingdom for more than 300 years. Emily looked toward Lucian, searching for an explanation. Instead, she found something she had not seen all night. Genuine uncertainty. For perhaps the first time in centuries, the Vampire King did not have the answer. Emily instinctively took one small step backward, clutching the blue scarf against her chest. The silver crest continued glowing softly, illuminating delicate threads that had remained hidden her entire life. She looked from the scarf to the people standing beneath the grand entrance and finally toward Lucian. The calm driver who had quietly bought her cinnamon rolls only an hour earlier now stood before a line of attendants who addressed him like a king. "Your Majesty," she whispered, almost afraid to say the words aloud. Lucian met her eyes with the same steady expression he had worn throughout the night, but there was a quiet honesty in his voice now. "I owe you an explanation." Emily let out a nervous laugh. I think that might be the understatement of the century. None of the attendants interrupted. They simply waited with perfect patience. Lucian slowly walked toward Emily instead of the mansion. Behind him, "Everything you have seen tonight is real," he said. "This estate has belonged to my family for many generations. The people here serve a kingdom that exists alongside the human world, but remains hidden from it." Emily searched his face, expecting to find some sign that this was an elaborate joke. She found none. Instead, she found the same quiet kindness that had convinced her to trust him hours earlier. "You are serious," she said softly. "Yes." Then, they were telling the truth. Lucian nodded once. They were. Emily looked toward the enormous mansion again. The impossible suddenly seemed strangely possible. The silent gates. The mysterious navigation system. The people waiting before he arrived. None of it felt accidental anymore. "You really are a king," she whispered. "Yes." She stared at him for another long moment before asking the question that mattered most. "Why did you never tell me?" Lucian answered without hesitation. "Because tonight you needed someone to listen to you, not someone for you to fear." Emily lowered her eyes. That answer reached her more deeply than any grand explanation could have. The steward quietly approached, stopping several feet away. "Your Majesty, the archives have already begun responding." Lucian turned slightly. "Responding? Ancient records have opened by themselves." Several sealed chambers became accessible only moments after Miss Carter entered the estate grounds. Emily blinked. "Because of me?" The steward inclined his head respectfully. "We believe so." Before anyone could continue, the silver crest on Emily's scarf shimmered again. This time faint lines of light spread outward across the fabric, forming what looked almost like an elegant map. Emily gasped. "It has never done this." One of the royal advisors removed a pair of glasses and stared in disbelief. "That is not merely a family crest," he murmured. "It is a guide." Lucian studied the glowing pattern carefully. Ancient memories surfaced from centuries ago. Stories told by scholars. Legends dismissed even by his own court. A royal guardian had once carried a woven map that revealed forgotten sanctuaries whenever the kingdom faced its greatest uncertainty. The map had vanished 300 years earlier. Everyone believed it had been lost forever. Emily looked up anxiously. "I do not understand any of this." Lucian's voice softened. "Neither do I. But I intend to." At that exact moment, a gentle breeze moved through the courtyard although the air had been perfectly still. Somewhere deep inside the estate, a massive bell rang once. Then again. Then a third time. Every attendant immediately became silent. The steward's face lost its calm composure for the first time. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "the Hall of Oaths has awakened. It only opens when the kingdom recognizes someone it has been waiting for." Emily tightened her grip on the scarf. She had arrived believing she had lost everything in one terrible night. Now an ancient kingdom seemed to believe it had finally found her. The ancient bell slowly faded into silence, but its echo seemed to linger inside the stone walls of the estate. No one moved. Even the rain had stopped completely, leaving the gardens wrapped in the pale light of approaching dawn. Emily stood at the center of the courtyard, still holding the blue scarf that had somehow transformed her ordinary life into something impossible. Only a few hours earlier she had been standing alone beneath a broken streetlight with nowhere to sleep. Now an entire hidden kingdom appeared to be waiting for her. Lucian stepped beside her, his voice calm enough to steady the uncertainty surrounding them both. "You are under my protection while you are here." Emily looked at him with tired but trusting eyes. "I still do not understand why any of this is happening." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But we will discover the truth together." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying things that somehow make impossible situations feel less frightening." Lucian looked toward the mansion where warm lights had begun appearing in dozens of windows. Servants quietly prepared the halls without unnecessary movement, almost as though the estate itself had been expecting dawn to arrive differently today. The steward approached once more carrying an elegant wooden box carved with ancient patterns. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a small silver key unlike any Emily had ever seen. Its surface reflected the same delicate symbols woven into her grandmother's scarf. "Your Majesty," the steward said respectfully, "the Hall of Oaths released this key only moments ago." Lucian examined it without touching it. "It has remained sealed for centuries." The steward nodded. "Until tonight." Emily stared at the strange key. "What does it open?" "That," Lucian answered honestly, "is something history forgot." The steward carefully offered the box toward Emily instead. The moment her fingertips brushed the silver key, The glowing crest on her scarf quietly faded. The light disappeared as gently as it had arrived, leaving only ordinary blue fabric resting in her hands. Everyone watched in silence. Emily blinked in surprise. It stopped. Lucian smiled softly. Perhaps it has already shown us what we needed to find. At that moment the first rays of sunrise appeared above the distant hills, washing the stone towers in warm golden light. Emily realized she had spent the entire night beside a man she had believed was simply a thoughtful driver. He had listened when she needed someone to listen. He had bought her breakfast when she could not afford it. He had never asked for anything in return. Only afterward had she learned he ruled an ancient hidden kingdom. She looked toward him again. "Can I ask one last question?" "Of course. If I had known who you really were before I got into your car, do you think I still would have trusted you?" Lucian considered the question for a quiet moment before answering. "Probably not." Emily laughed warmly. "You are right." He looked toward the open gates where the long road disappeared into the waking world. Sometimes the truth arrives only after trust has already found its place. Emily slipped the silver key into the pocket of her jacket beside her grandmother's scarf. For the first time in many months she no longer felt completely lost. She did not know why the ancient crest had chosen her. She did not know what waited beyond the Hall of O's. She did not even know how a single ride through the rain had changed the course of her life forever. But she did know one thing. The kind stranger who had quietly driven a heartbroken woman through the darkest hours of the night had become the one person she believed she could trust with whatever came next. And somewhere beyond the quiet walls of Blackwood Estate, unseen eyes were already watching the sunrise, knowing that the return of the silent crest would soon change far more than the fate of one lonely human girl or one immortal king. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it simply begins with one act of kindness on a rainy night.